Hey there, so today we're talking about case study 3. So our first 2 case studies brought us through babies and infants, and now we are moving on to talking about early childhood. So what we're going to be doing here is we are actually going to be putting ourselves in the role of a person who has finished their master's degree, is now considered a professional in their field, and they are going to be giving a presentation. And for this assignment, you get to choose your audience. So, who are you giving your presentation to? You get to choose your topic from the early childhood topics. Um, and then you're going to be obviously learning more about your topic. And then you'll be creating a short presentation. Presentation should be between 10 and 15 minutes. And if you think to yourself, that's short, it is. If you go to conference, most presentations are 60 minutes. So this is a short presentation. And so you'll be creating a short presentation. You're going to be creating the slides for your presentation. And then you're also going to be creating a notes page where you're going to put kind of the things that you would say if you were to give this presentation. You are not required to give the presentation, although I do suggest that you kind of practice it to make sure that the slides that you've created with the notes that you've created and the activity that you have, which I'll talk about in a second, won't run over 15 minutes. So you do kind of want to at least practice it. But it is not required for you to record said presentation and actually do said presentation. Okay. So we're going to be creating the PowerPoint or Google Slides for this. Keep in mind that your visual is really a guide. Visual is not the place to put all of your crap. Okay. It is not the place to put every single word that you're going to be saying. It is literally a guide. It is literally a outline of the topics. So you can keep yourself on track and the audience can see what's coming next. Okay. So we don't want to be doing what we call death by PowerPoint, which is where we put everything on the PowerPoint slide. And the people there are like, why wasn't this an email? Like I could have just read this PowerPoint by myself, right? So we want to make sure that we've got a PowerPoint or Google Slides. We've got notes, which include what we would say in terms of, and it can be just similar to a script, okay? And everyone has to have some sort of activity. Now, an activity can be something like asking a question and discussing answers. So let's say that my topic for my presentation is on, I'm looking through the list of potential topics, by the way. Hold on one second. My presentation is on, the zone of proximal development. Okay. And so I define zone of proximal development, and then I give some examples of it. And then I ask the people who are participating in my talk, who I've decided are first grade teachers, how they, in their classrooms, assess or would assess what a child's zone of proximal development is. And I give them a couple minutes to think about it. And then I ask multiple members of the group to share their experiences or their ideas. Then we talk about scaffolding and what scaffolding is. And then I ask the teachers to take a couple minutes to think about how they already use or could use scaffolding more in their classes, to make their learning outcomes better. Okay, so that's pretty much the gist of what we're doing. We are giving information. We are having the participants interact somehow with the information because the research shows that doing so makes it more relevant, makes it more memorable. And then you are providing me with the notes that you would use for your presentation. There is a template for the notes in the assignment so that you can literally just download the template and start typing your stuff in there. There's an example of a PowerPoint and a notes template in there, including and there's a section on the notes template for you to indicate how your activity will work. If you are thinking to yourself, like, what kind of activity, like, how am I going to do this? If you look at the actual assignment page, if you scroll down to resources, I actually have put a couple of links to educational activities that you can do with adults. So you want to think to yourself, you can go through those and go, okay, the topic I really want to talk about is this. And so I'm going to go through and look for an activity that will help me to reach the learning outcomes for my presentation. And your presentation does have to have 2 learning outcomes. So basically 2 things that students should be able to do, or whoever's watching your presentation should be able to do once you've finished with the presentation. Learning outcomes are what we call SMART goals. They're specific, they're measurable, and they are something that can be actually completed within the time frame available. So you don't want to use a learning outcome of, the participant will learn or the participant will be able to summarize all of Freud's theories, because I'm not going to be able to present all of that in 10 to 15 minutes, right? Whereas you may say the participant will be able to describe Piaget's pre-operational stage of cognitive development, something like that. Okay. And in writing learning outcomes, you want to review the learning outcomes that we have for the class, that we have for each chapter, so you can see how learning outcomes are written. They are written in terms of observable things that a person can do, and they're very specific. And one of the reasons why it's useful for us to understand this is that if you go into counseling, if you become a counselor, you're going to have to write treatment outcomes. And treatment outcomes cannot be client will become happier. That's not a treatment outcome, because there's no way. How are you assessing that? How are you, are you just going to ask the client every week, like, so are you happy? That's not how this works. So you have to start thinking like a scientist and be like, okay, if my client wants to increase their experience with pleasure throughout the week, then I have to think of how can I or my client assess that on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, so that we can actually get some data so we can demonstrate that the trend is in upward motion. Okay, so when you're talking about or writing your learning outcomes, you really want to think about how specific are they, and are they actually measurable? Okay, the verbs that we use in learning outcomes should be active, not passive verbs. Active verbs are, describe, draw, summarize. Passive verbs are, think about, things like that. Okay. If you want to Google more information about learning outcomes, you can do that. I will not be grading you on how good your learning outcomes are, but I will be, excuse me, giving you feedback about your learning outcomes, in terms of, especially I know a lot of you want to become counselors or therapists. So I will give you feedback about, well, take a look at this one and decide how can we make it more specific or something like that. Okay. So if you have more questions about this case study, review case study 3, all of the instructions. I know there's a lot of stuff there, but there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of information. And if you still have questions, post them to the case studies discussion thread or send me an email in Canvas inbox. All right, thanks.